CNN has fired commentator and Temple University professor Mark Lamont Hill after comments he made defending Palestinians living in what is essentially an open-air prison in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Now, these comments were made in New York at the United Nations. So I'm going to play this clip for you, and then we're going to talk about it. Watch.
The Great Catastrophe in May 1948, they resulted in the expulsion, murder, and to date, permanent dislocation of more than 1 million Palestinians. For every minute that the global community has articulated a clear and lucid framework for human rights, the Palestinian people have been deprived of the most fundamental of them. While the Universal Declaration for Human Rights says that all people are, quote, born free and equal in dignity and rights, the Israeli nation-state continues to restrict freedom and undermine equality for Palestinian citizens of Israel, as well as those in the West Bank and Gaza. At the current moment, there are more than 60 Israeli laws that deny Palestinians access to full citizenship rights, simply because they're not Jewish. From housing to education to family reunification, it is clear that any freedoms naturally endowed to all human beings are actively being stripped away from Palestinians through Israeli statecraft. We have an opportunity to not just offer solidarity in words, but to commit to political action, grassroots action, local action, and international action that will give us what justice requires. And that is a free Palestine from the river to the sea. Thank you for your time.
Was any of that offensive to you? Mark Lamont Hill here is simply standing up for the rights of Palestinians that are being treated as second-class citizens by the right-wing Israeli government. Palestinians that are essentially living in an open-air prison in the Gaza Strip. Nothing about this was wrong. Everything Mark Lamont Hill said here was factually correct. But it appears that anytime anybody with any sort of platform criticizes the Israeli government, they are somehow looked at by a lot of mainstream figures as being anti-Semitic. How is it anti-Semitic to criticize a right-wing Israeli government? This is a government. A government that is treating Palestinians as second-class citizens. Now, I guess one of the lines here that some right-wingers that got triggered over that led to CNN firing him was when Mark Lamont Hill said at the end, "From the river to the sea." So, "from the river to the sea," I guess, is a quote that apparently, according to them, is used by Hamas. But if you look at just geography, that's what he was referring to. So let me show you how Mark Lamont Hill responded to his firing and him explaining the use of that line. "I support Palestinian freedom. I support Palestinian self-determination. I am deeply critical of Israeli policy and practice. I do not support anti-Semitism, killing Jewish people, or any of the other things attributed to my speech. I have spent my life fighting these things. My reference to river to the sea was not a call to destroy anything or anyone. It was a call for justice, both in Israel and in the West Bank/Gaza. The speech very clearly and specifically said these things. No amount of debate will change what I actually said or what I meant. This isn't a case of throwing rocks or hiding hands. I genuinely believe in the arguments and principles that I shared in the speech. I also genuinely want peace, freedom, and security for everyone. These are not competing ideals and values." Now, after seeing the clip and reading his comments, I don't know how anyone could argue with that. It was clear that he was standing up for human rights. Yet, some people, including CNN, took it the wrong way, or were maybe afraid of the backlash that it may cause, because these networks constantly give in to right-wing pressure. They do it all the fucking time. They always treat right-wing arguments as an equal argument to left-wing arguments based on science, on facts. Like, just look at the years that CNN had discussions about climate change, where there'd be one side saying, yes, climate change is happening, the other side saying, no, climate change is not happening, even though all the facts, all the data, all the science was only on one side of the argument. Yet they treated the arguments as equals. This is what they do constantly, and they're doing it here as well. Now, let me show you some reaction from around the internet. So, first here from new Congresswoman-elect Rashida Tlaib, calling out the oppressive policies in Israel, advocating for Palestinians to be respected and for Israelis and Palestinians alike to have peace and freedom is not anti-Semitic. CNN, we all have a right to speak up about injustice any and everywhere. David Cleon responded saying, everyone understands CNN wouldn't fire a contributor who said they think Israel has a biblical right to the West Bank, yes? In fact, they almost certainly have contributors who believe that. It's straight up discriminatory to fire Mark Lamont Hill, and that's how it should be framed. This from Jewish Voice for Peace, quoting Youssef Munir. The demand that Palestinians have equal rights from the river to the sea is not radical or racist or bigoted. Rather, anything short of that would be. And this from The Intercept, quoting Glenn Greenwald. The accusations launched against Mark Lamont Hill, that his comments are anti-Semitic and constitute advocacy of genocide, are so disingenuous and blatantly false that one is reluctant to even dignify them with a substantive critique. So that's part of the problem here, is that even having to defend these comments makes it seem like that these are comments that need to be defended, when they are not. What Mark Lamont Hill discussed here was, as I said, just fact. If you have any sense of morality, any sense of compassion, any empathy whatsoever, you would agree with him. Now, maybe if you are not educated on what is happening in Israel, then you might disagree. But if you are educated on what is happening, then you would agree with his comments, if you have any sense of morals. So let me show you, this is more of a breakdown that really gets into the details here, and this is from Abraham Guttman of Philly.com. From Tel Aviv, Mark Lamont Hill's Palestine comments don't sound so wrong to me. As an Israeli Jew, I understand what is at stake. Tel Aviv is my hometown. As I write this, I'm sitting in my parents' living room. I'm literally between the river and the sea, introducing my family to my baby daughter and meeting my newest niece. The destruction of this city is not something I would cheer for, and that's why I stand with Hill's call for freedom and dignity for all people in this troubled land. In Israel, there are about 2 million residents who are Palestinian, 21% of the population living as second-class citizens. That is not hyperbole or an attempt at a poetic description. This year, Israel enacted a law that enshrines the country as the state of the Jewish people, not of Israelis. In 2014, Israel bombed Gaza from the air and invaded it with ground forces, resulting in the death of 2,251, the majority of whom were civilians, including 551 children. More than 18,000 buildings were destroyed, leaving 100,000 people displaced. This year alone, more than 150 Palestinians were killed by the Israeli army while protesting the blockade of Gaza, including children, journalists, and people with disabilities. Israel reserves the death penalty only for people who assisted the Nazis in the Holocaust, but the Israeli army brings snipers to protests in Gaza, warning that damaging the border fence equals death. Meanwhile, last week in the Israeli city of Afula, Jewish residents rallied to prevent their Palestinian neighbors, citizens of the State of Israel, from using public parks. City officials vowed to preserve the, quote, Jewish character of the city. So, I wish I could read that whole article. That's from Abraham Guttman for Philly.com. I'm going to link to this below the video. I highly suggest you read this article after watching this video because it really gives you the real context on what is going on in Israel and understanding the position of Mark Lamont Hill. Now, I'm going to end on this last thing here. This is a petition that was started by Ryan Grimm of The Intercept. He put this out, CNN reverse firing of Mark Lamont Hill for endorsing a one-state solution to Israel-Palestine crisis. So I'm also going to link to this petition on the Action Network that I suggest you sign. I'm not sure if it'll really help. I think it's rare for companies to hire somebody back after they fire them, but it did happen to Sam Cedar, who was fired from MSNBC as a contributor and then brought back on after there's a huge backlash to it. So if there is a big enough backlash to this firing, and right now there is, then hopefully it'll wake some people up at CNN to realize that what Mark Lamont Hill said was not wrong.